So, welcome to Quarantine All Access. We have Henry Jackman here. Henry, how are you doing?
I'm doing, given the circumstances, I'm doing pretty good, thanks.
That's good. Good to see you. It's been a while since we've gotten to chat.
Indeed, yeah. Way too long.
So, for anyone listening, we've done or watching, we've done a lot of interviews with Henry in the past. So, if you want to go, we're not going to go over old ground. I'm going to try to keep it fresh and new for both of our sakes. So
I'll try not to repeat myself.
So if you need to learn about how Henry snuck out, during boarding school to watch Predator and all those stories, fun stories, you can go back and watch our old interviews.
Exactly.
So just before we jump into some projects, I just kind of maybe want to tackle some big picture questions that maybe maybe cover some old ground sometimes. But let's see. I always wanted to know why music. Why did you choose music as a career, and why not like biology or accounting or something like that? What made you kind of fall into this path?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'd love to give a sort of pompous answer that would highlight all my other multifaceted skills, but if I'm being really honest, if I didn't do music, I'm not quite sure what would be happening. I'm not sure I'm somewhat articulate, but since a really early age, I started piano lessons when I was 4 and whatnot. I honestly don't think I'd be that good at anything else, if I'm really honest. I suppose some of it is my musical education. Thanks to my dad, my musical education was really both like eclectic and completely unjudgmental. He would insist I listen to the Sex Pistols and then insist I listen to like Bartok's Miraculous Mandarin, thrusting the score in front of me. Imagine being age 7 trying to follow the score from Miraculous Mandarin with these like violin, hypertuplets and God knows what else. It was so I had a really eclectic. Whereas in some musicians or composers have to sort of struggle perhaps to break out of expectations from their parents who, I don't know, might have hoped they were lawyers or doctors or something financially safe. My family background was such that there really was nothing else. My grandfather was a musician, my father was a composer, my uncle was in the King Singers and conducts, choirs, and my other uncle, that's all there was. So to be anything else actually would have been required a sort of feat of willpower rather than the classic story of like, in order to be a musician, I had to, fight the wishes of my parents and prove everyone wrong. I honestly can't think that anything else would have happened. I guess I'm not bad at writing. I suppose at a real push, I could have been a half-baked journalist perhaps, but I'm not sure. There's plenty of good ones.
Totally good points, Henry. So at what point did you decide to relocate your entire life to the United States? Because I've talked to many composers, including others from the UK. I've talked to John Powell or Daniel Pemberton is a good example. He decided to stay in the UK and build a career there. What was the kind of deciding factor that said, okay, I think, leaving my home country and coming to a new place, what was the fact that said, that's definitely what I need to do?
Well, at the risk of giving the worst kind of advice to all of your, because I know you have a lot of listeners and some of them have a great passion for film music. Some of them are probably thinking about, how to get into it. But without sounding like a hippie, I did absolutely no strategic planning of any kind whatsoever. Everything was an accident. For example, the only reason I came to LA is I've still got the facts somewhere. I got summoned to hang out with Seal for his, I think, 4th album. So I was in Benedict Canyon. This is way before, at that point, I thought film music was something for like old, uncool people. You know what I mean? I was hanging out with Bjork and Seal and Trevor Horn, and I was making records and was too cool for school. And so I came over to work with Seal, and that went on and on and on. I had a great time. And when that finished, I think it might have been 2001, something like that. It was a bit of a hippie decision. I thought, well, since I've been working really hard, I'm going to go to the Far East for the hell of it and just chill in like Malaysia and Thailand for a bit. And then when I get back to LA, I'll make one of 2 choices. If I land, because I've been in LA for about 1.5 years. If I land in LA and it feels like a foreign country, I'll get another plane and then go back to England, which is where I'm from. But if I land in LA and it feels like I've been away and now I'm back and it feels like home, I'll just like take it from there.
Yeah.
So this is way before film music. So I landed in LA and I just couldn't think of a reason to get on a plane to go to England, really. I'd shipped over quite a few things. So I got an apartment in Los Feliz and whatnot. This is still way before film music. And I started, you know, I was still working in the record industry, doing a few things. And it was not long after that that Hans Zimmer heard an album I did called Transfiguration. Again, all a bit sort of random, really. Bob Badamy, who's a legendary music editor, who's very, very tight with Hans. You can imagine the sheer amount of music that people try to send to Hans. It probably never even reaches his ears, you know. And thanks to a very dear friend of mine called Elisa Badalamenti, she was friends with Bob, said, you know, you should have a listen to this. It's pretty interesting what this English guy's done. So Bob heard it and went, actually, you know what? It is pretty interesting. And then he played it to Hans, because it was a weird combination of, I'd done a sort of remix of Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas Arya, When I'm Laid, which is actually a 17th century Baroque aria from an opera. But I'd sort of produced it as if it were a Bjork album. It sounded a bit like something off Vespertine. So it had like crunchy, weird electronica, but a string arrangement and a dead straight voice. It's really weird. So anyway, Hans heard it and went, God, that's a bit left field. And Hans likes things that are disruptive, meaning this thing had a very classical intro with strings, and then suddenly all hell let loose about 16 bars later, and it's just everything you would not expect. It's got, I mean, you're either going to hate it or love it. It's so opinionated, this piece. So he just called me and went, when do you do this? Like, where are you? What are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm actually just in LA. He said, well, you should come and have a chat. And I think at that point, I had started to get a bit bored with, which sounds terrible, I've got the ultimate respect for well put together pop music. Anyone who's snobbish about pop music of any kind, rock music, pop music, electronica, dubstep, whatever it is, anyone who's snobby about any of those genres, you try excelling in them. You know, I've got a lot of respect. Yeah, any kind of music can be done brilliantly or done in an amateur and unimaginative fashion, you know. Anyway, I think because of my classical background and whatnot, I just started to get to the point where even some of the most interesting artists like Bjork and Seal at the time, who are a bit more exploratory with arrangement and texture and chords and everything, I think I was getting to the point of saying, well, at the end of the day, it's always like 3 minutes, 45 seconds, and it's not like you can go on a mad adventure with the harmony and everything. And, you know, all of this sort of classical background I was getting a little bit frustrated. So it was the most amazing timing, because I went and hung out with Hans and had my eyes open, because like some sort of, you know, idiot, I had this idea of film music was for like old, maybe it's the sort of you get into when you're 60 kind of thing. You know, Hans is cool. Hans used to hang out with Trevor Horn. They were like peas in a pod. You know, Hans is like the film, like my incredible luck in getting to hang out with a legendary record producer who was groundbreaking like Trevor Horn. Repeated itself all over again when I hung out with Hans, who's sort of the same role model to me, but on the film music side, you know. And it's not like he's not cool. He used to make records, you know what I mean? He's just as comfortable messing around. In fact, I think I found out, I don't know if this is apocryphal, and sadly my father passed away quite a while ago. I think something along the lines of either my dad was part of something that was happening in the late 70s, and they needed at like midnight in 1977 in London a synth part, and they rung around, and there was this German kid with a Prophet who would just show up at any time and like nail it. And it was Hans. You know what I mean? So that, you know, he was the cool kid with all the toys.
Right.
He knew how to do, you know, sequencey stuff for pop records and whatnot. Anyway, so yeah, if you were hoping for a strategically planned answer where I knew I not only did I make the decision to stay in America on the flip of a coin at an airport, I had no idea to do film music because I was I just like working in the record industry. Although, like I say, I was getting a bit musically hemmed in. And it was just thanks to fortune and the recommendations of others that, and like I say, when I went to go and see Hans, it was like a light bulb going off. I was like, oh, instead of moaning to my agent in pop music, oh God, you know, it's all the same. The fact, if you've got a very eclectic background and you're just as interested in writing some music that's inspired by, I don't know, 15th century church music. The one place you can do that is film music.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? You might be working on a film that's to do with the massacre of the Huguenots in France in 16-something, and suddenly knowing how to do modal harmony is a tool you're going to need. Or you might be doing some movie set in the future, and it's sort of iRobot or Oblivion or something, and suddenly you need to not sound like your grandpa doing like legit electronica. Suddenly, instead of having all these paints and you're getting frustrated, you need all those paints because, well, you don't have to. You could specialize, in film music, but it means that you are just as comfortable with something like Oblivion as you are, some historical drama. And I don't know why it took me that, it's just luck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, life paves its own path, and you just kind of walk where it paves.
Exactly. I mean, it's luck, and then you have to just work ridiculously hard.
Yeah. You didn't just like somersault into this. So.
No. Because what happens is you get the breaks, and then the only thing, I mean, some people are unlucky enough not to get the breaks, and then people get the breaks, and it still doesn't happen because the thing is, you have to get the breaks, and then it's about 90. Having 2% is the breaks. The other 98% is just really, really hard work, for me anyway. Yeah.
Exactly. So kind of looking at the trajectory of your career, and I know that, you did start kind of in that record world. So you did have a musical background coming into the film music stuff, but kind of looking back at your early days of additional music writing, and then of course your first score, Monsters vs. Aliens, where would you rate like your confidence level as a composer at that point compared to maybe now?
Terrified. I mean,
really?
Monsters vs. Aliens. I mean, I was confident that I know, I mean, I was at St. Paul's Cathedral Choir School when I was about 7 years old. But I mean, that doesn't mean it. That's all very well and good in terms of like, oh, well, you're very knowledgeable about music. But in terms of how much experience have you had putting together, an 85-minute score for a $200 million movie under the auspices of Jeffrey Katzenberg? Answer, 0. Absolute 0. So I think it's no exaggeration to say, I mean, maybe no one would have noticed in meetings and whatnot, but internally, I think it was one of the most challenging things. I think it sort of has to be. I feel like if you're doing something for the first time and it doesn't have that feeling, then it's probably something wrong.
Yeah, if you're not scared. They always say fear is a good tell. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, unless you're just so supremely naturally talented that everything you do is perfect. But definitely, I would say more than working with. I remember when I first met Trevor Horn, I was pretty terrified, and he was very cool. Put me, and it wasn't like I had to write an entire score. That was just like meeting. I was only like 22 or something, but he was cool. He was cool as a cucumber. But yeah, it's totally different because I would say the experience of Monsters vs. Aliens, I don't think there was ever a problem that I didn't know how to write music. The issue was, are you going to be able to stand firm as the ship passes through the Cape of Good Hope or wherever? It was much more to do with when you get 35-foot waves, will all the furniture fly off the boat or is it properly bolted on? It was a really good lesson in the pressure and the time and all the things that have to happen require a whole load of qualities actually aren't to do with writing music. It's quite possible to imagine a scenario in which someone is highly musically talented but just doesn't make it for those reasons of pressure and whatnot, and someone else who may not be as talented but fantastically organized and very psychologically resilient would perhaps be more likely to have you need quite a lot of different qualities. So,
sides,
I would be like, if I said, Monsters vs. Aliens, I wrote these themes, they liked the themes, and I just plowed through the score and everything was hunky-dory, it would just be a blatant lie. But I tell you what, I don't feel bad about that. I know we're always banging on about Predator with my hero, Alan Silvestri. When I finally got to talk to him about Predator, because I think it's got this innovative use of harmony that just doesn't show up in the history of film music. I mean, it's like a seminal deployment of harmony, but for the sort of heroic fallen soldier theme. The whole thing's octatonic. And I mean, me and John Powell were talking about this. We found like 8 bars of Rimsky-Korsakov that adhere to the same harmonic, it was very original. So I call him up expecting some long-winded, explanation of his sort of grand idea. And he goes, Henry, to be honest with you, all I can remember about Predator was just floundering. I just felt like I'm not even a film composer. Why have they asked me? I don't really know what I'm doing. I was like, if you listen to the score and then try and tally that with the self-confession of a guy going, to be honest, all I remember was just feeling a bit out of my depth. Which is absolutely, it's not what comes through in the music. What you hear in the music is the consummate work of a complete genius.
Which is funny because I talked to him about that theme. Like I interviewed him and we broke the theme down. He was like, it was just about testosterone. It was just about, just like. And
but honestly, but the first thing that came out of his mouth was the memory of feeling a bit like he was floundering, and he didn't feel like some supreme commander of his compositional. No, I don't know. He might have just been saying that to be self-effacing, but I don't know. It's probably true.
He's a very honest man. I would take him at his word.
I think so. So, I've learned that when I remember doing a gig with Seal in Mandalay Bay Hotel, and the first act was bells and whistles. It was Christina Aguilera, and it was just, rockets and, massive production. And then it was me, Seal, and his guitar, and it was really stripped down. It was really basic. Seal, totally honest, singing, playing the guitar, me playing the piano. There's one other guitar player. And I don't know why I agreed to do it, because I don't really do live. I love doing composing. And he kind of really sneakily forced me into it by going, hey, listen, I just got to go down to do this gig for Tiger Woods. It's no big deal. You know how to play. We'll just jam. You'll figure it out. You know the chords for Kiss from a Rose. And I was like, yeah, but can't you get like a proper pro session dude or someone who you've been on tour with so I can carry on the album? And he was like, oh, no, I'll get someone else if you admit out loud that you're a complete coward. And I was like, what? I said, what? Obviously you can play it. I said, well, yeah, of course I can. Well, then what's the problem? Come on, then, let's do it. I was like, oh, right. So by the time I got to this gig, I was absolutely petrified. It was live on TV. We got to the green room. Sia was busy being all charming and wandering around having a drink and, totally relaxed. I was in the green room about to have some sort of heart attack. And Joe Pesci was in there. And he was pacing around going, God damn it, I don't know why I agreed to do this. I get so damn nervous at these things. And I was like, oh, well, I mean, Joe Pesci is an absolute legend, and he's pacing around. He was comparing, he was doing some of the blurb,
right,
to the crowd and everything. And once I saw that he was pacing around, regretting that, getting all nervous and going, I don't know why I say yes. It's like Joe Pesci, everyone. I mean, you can't mess with Joe Pesci. He's like a legend.
Right. But it's funny because you think about it, Joe Pesci doesn't really do interviews. He's kind of pretty shy. I think he's a shy dude. Yeah.
He did a great job. I just remember, I can't remember if he verbally articulated, I might have exaggerated that, but I just remember seeing that while Sia was supremely confident, I wasn't the only one thinking, I'm a bit nervous. I sort of relaxed about it. So, I think you need a bit of, it was a bit debilitating how nervous I was on Monsters vs. Aliens, which is natural because it's the first thing.
Absolutely.
I think but you want a bit of that. I don't think you ever want to get so complacent that you're just like, oh, it's just another movie,
Right.
I think if that happens, it'll show.
I think if that happens, it means you don't care. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you're nervous, you care.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It just mustn't be debilitating. That's all. I'm sure if you spoke to even top performers of every kind, whether it's actors, classical pianists, or anyone in a band, I think if you talk to them just before going on stage, if they're just like, yeah, I'm fine, I don't have any change in my temperament, they're probably
stage, yeah.
Yeah, they're probably not about to give a great performance.
Well, with Mons, I was documenting his behind the scenes for this tour, and he gets extremely nervous before he walks onto that stage every night,
Yeah. And then he's great, I remember.
And he's great. And he's having a blast. Yeah.
Oh, dude, it looks like I remember seeing him at Coachella, and he was just interacting with the crowd, he was having a ball. But same thing, I bet the rehearsal was really tight, and then there's like a bit of pressure, and then like half an hour before. Imagine what right. I bet you, if you're walking out to the final of the Champions League, even if you're Lionel Messi, you know, you probably got butterflies half an hour before the whistle goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes away once the kickoff starts. You know, you're in.
Right. So, you know, now that you've established this career and you're kind of a veteran of the industry, would you look back at Monsters versus Aliens? Would you have done anything different back then that you would have done now, knowing everything that you've known, maybe how your sound has developed, your approach has developed, or would you be like, that was me, I'm proud of that, and that's who I was?
No, I'm definitely proud of it. I think, like my mother always says, you can only do what you think is right at the time.
Right.
I think I am pretty proud of it, actually. I mean, I work really hard on it. Usually, it probably suffers from when you get your first opportunity to show what you can do. You pack everything with everything. You know, if it suffers from, but fortunately, thank God, luckily for me, it was a sort of movie that required an almost melodramatic, overblown score half the time. So I kind of got away with it. But you know, what tends to happen is when you look back on stuff that you do earlier, it's the level of your level of poise gets better as you get older, and you're more likely to throw the kitchen sink at something, you know, earlier in a bid to demonstrate to everyone that you can do, you know, that you have every virtuoso chop that you're dying for everyone to hear, you know.
Right.
But with Monsters vs. Aliens, part of that was sort of needed for the movie. So, you know, thankfully it wasn't a sort of highly understated drama with Helen Mirren, William Hurt and Sigourney Weaver.
Right.
Where someone desperate to show off all their chops would have, you know, come in direct conflict with the filmmaker. So I got lucky in that respect.
Absolutely. So last time we talked, it was a while ago. We talked about Ralph Breaks the Internet and The Predator. So you've done a couple projects since then. I kind of want to maybe just touch on them briefly before we focus on the Comey Rule. But the last time we talked, you were just, I think, working on Detective Pikachu.
Oh yeah.
And I love the film. It turned out so great. And I remember you were super excited because I think you and Rob were talking about, like, oh, it's, you know, talking about maybe Who Framed Roger Rabbit as an inspiration, maybe that kind of. So did you kind of get your itch about, you know, scratch your itch for live action animation film noir? Did you get to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky with Rob because he's a good director. He's very open-minded. He's really into music. I mean, he rang me and said, "Hey, dude, I got this like broken 808 drum machine. Can I come round and we like jam?" And you know, he literally was. Well, I think a track that sort of sums up some of the fun I had on the Pikachu movie, Detective Pikachu, was that track, what's it called? Rhyme City, which has this sort of, you know, I was very strict in not using any plugins. It's all original Roland D550, MKS 50, I can't remember what others said, Juno 106. I mean, it took ages because it was like making a record in the late 80s, 90s. Yeah. But it got a certain sound. If people want to sort of, if they can't be bothered to listen to 60 minutes of music, and I don't blame them, check out Rhyme City, which is a sort of blend of orchestra and some of these slightly nostalgic-inducing synths used in kind of patterns that are slightly reminiscent of like Mike Oldfield, or like they're quite patterny. It triggers a certain memory of synth writing that I don't know. It was an interesting combination of elements that was synth and orchestra that had this sort of. It was sort of futuristic, but had a weird nostalgia to it.
Yeah,
I can't
it was
quite
great.
put my finger on it.
No, I love the way you approached it, and it was the movie was super entertaining and just well made, and performances were great. The effects were great. It was everything tied together fantastically.
Yeah, and I went to Japan for the premiere.
Oh, nice!
Fascinating cultural experience that made me realize how it's a very formal. You know, if you go to a premiere in America, you know, it's great. There are usually kids everywhere who want all the autographs of the stars.
Yeah.
There's a great sort of excited but essentially casual atmosphere. People clap when certain names come up of their colleagues that they know and all this kind of thing. So I went to the premiere in Japan, and when it finished, there was an absolute stony silence. And I thought, oh dear, perhaps they were there some cultural appropriation errors? Are they offended? Do they know? And then after a period, there was a sort of quite formal clap. I was like, oh no, it's just cultural. It's sitting down at a premiere to watch a movie is much more like a sort of classical concert. It's not, it's not a casual thing. And it's obviously very important, that culturally it's a Japanese, it comes from Japanese culture.
Yeah,
and
Pokemon is a Japanese export.
Oh my God, yeah. And Rob had all manner of meetings. It wasn't just a case of meeting the aesthetic requirements of Legendary and Warner's and whatnot. There were all manner of discussions with the whoever owns the actual copyright, to make sure
the Pokemon company. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, to make sure that things are culturally in tune with the original and all the rest of it. He had an awful lot of that kind of thing. But yeah, at first I thought, oh my God, they don't like it. But it wasn't true at all. And it was the same in the interview. I remember various people were interviewed, on the red carpet and everything. And it looked a bit like the sort of interview where you might be asking the vice president something. It was all quite serious.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember because my wife and I went to Japan earlier this year before the pandemic. It was right before the pandemic hit, so we were able to go. And we got to the Pokemon store, and it was just like this massive, beautiful thing. We're just like, it was like Disneyland, It's the way it's like cherished there. And I grew up, buying the cards and collecting the cards. So it was a fun experience.
Yeah, it's a whole world.
Absolutely. So you also did, I just hit my microphone there, but so you did two films that were tied together by Matthew Michael Carnahan, Mosul, which he wrote and directed, and 21 Bridges, which he co-wrote. Well, 21 Bridges, of course, came out last year. Mosul is actually, I think, coming November 26th on Netflix. And now this film, it was told fully through the point of view of Iraqi kind of, I think it's a Nineveh SWAT team story. What was it like putting yourself in that POV of the story, and what did the score need to accomplish with this film?
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually did that a while ago because it took a while to find a home. So yeah, that feels like ancient history that I have to dig in. I tell you what I do remember is the sheer intellectual acumen of Matthew. Who now he did that was entirely written by Matthew and directed.
Yes.
Where 21 Bridges was directed by someone else, but Matthew both wrote and directed Mosul, and he is, he's like the epitome of the smart American, highly educated, very funny. I mean, it's not like he's pompous or anything. Yeah. Super educated, spends a lot of time in Washington, wouldn't be out of place in a political think tank, knocking out papers on, the future of the 21st century economy and how it's going to work. I mean, the guy is seriously bright and is an expert on foreign affairs and doesn't have a sort of jingoistic or nationalistic or simplified understanding of foreign affairs. He has a very nuanced. So that's why Mosul's really interesting, because rather than, I mean, the cliche would be like, hey, let's do a movie about events in Iraq. And then the next thought would ordinarily be, commercially, well, I don't think we can make a foreign language movie with 4 unknown people all speaking in the indigenous languages of Iraq. I think we're going to have like a Matt Damon.
Right.
Maybe the story has to be, we have like an American operative and he's hanging out and say, well, no, why do we have to do that? Why can't we just, it doesn't need any Americans in it. Why can't we just have a story set in the chaos of post 2003 invaded Iraq? And it's a pretty brave decision because it's not going to involve actors that you've seen before or heard of.
Right.
And it's going to be a foreign language film, but it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I would recommend it to anyone it's got, in the same way that Paul Greengrass has a scrupulously journalistic approach to filmmaking that doesn't, it's ambiguous in a good way and doesn't fall easy. So Captain Phillips, for example, if you watch Captain Phillips, go, this is going to be great because we're going to see like the Americans kicking the crap out of these like baddie Somalian pirates. That's so not what that movie's about. By the time you finish watching Captain Phillips, if you had any lazy simplified ideas of what a pirate is, you will soon have learned that, I mean, even though obviously the events that unfold are extremely hazardous, and it's extremely unfortunate that, you know, an American commercial ship got boarded. The point is, these are 4 23-year-old kids who live in a country that you couldn't even realistically call a country. Every institution of their country is completely screwed, and they can either join a gang, get some money, and by the way, the money they get from they then have to hand over feudally to their sort of overlords, and it's an incredibly dangerous thing to do. So I'm not justifying it. I'm saying by the time you've watched the Paul Greengrass version of these events, you get both sides. It's
both sides. Very neutral approach to it.
Exactly. So you end up with this feeling of, thank God Captain Phillips is okay, and thank God they got rescued. But you have an overall feeling of like, what a mess and what a shame the world is how it is, such that young kids in Somalia end up, you know, risking their own lives and getting into this terrible trouble. And Matthew's is similar to that, in that if you had any simplified notions about what's been going on in Iraq since the fall of Saddam Hussein, you watch this and you're going to end up going, that was interesting.
Right. Yeah.
And you find, but nor is it a polemic. You watch it, it's not trying to make some heavy-handed, but nor is it it's not like it's anti-American.
Right.
It's not anti or pro anything. It's a story where you get to follow the activities of an Iraqi SWAT team and what they're up against and what the reality of life in Mosul is like. And it's a real eye-opener.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know, you mentioned that you finished it a while ago, because I think if you check IMDb, it was dated a year or 2 ago. And but it's finally coming out on Netflix. I think I saw the trailer. It's in November 26th. So it's definitely worth checking out.
It is worth checking out. And music, the other comparison I'd make with working with Paul Greengrass is, because that kind of movie, the very last thing you want is epic narrative, thematic material. I mean, it is so realistic. I mean, they even got drone footage of Mosul at times when it was pretty hazardous.
Wow.
To be there. I mean, it was such a legit film. They even had trouble with, you know, some of the casting. Some of the people were being questioned in terms of like, this person might not be a persona grata in terms, you know, just security background. I mean, it was all fine. It wasn't like they were working with anyone who was hazardous, but you don't have to do a security background check on Matt Damon with regard to whether he has any connections with ISIS. Okay.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, the point is, because of Greengrass's documentary-ish influence style, you know, the man was a journalist, he doesn't like, and nor should he, because the kind of filmmaking it has, music that has a strong narrative opinion. It has to be, mustn't do anything to upset that moral ambiguity that he's really good at in his films. And it was the same thing with Matthew. It's a very textual, you know, we became the masters of exploring texture. And you know, when you need to do the storytelling in the music, it's how to do it in such a way that it's, if it were a painting, it would be much more like a Mondrian or something geometric. It can't have landscape and trees and figures. As soon as it feels either heroic or as soon as something feels, it's how to do tension and how to do relief without using any sort of emotionally obvious tropes that start tilting the audience. And Matthew was very, I would say he was similar to Greengrass in the desire for music never to intrude and start having simplistic narrative opinions that would upset this very, you know, ambiguous and intelligent filmmaking that he's made. And I actually really like, it's the sort of thing where, you know, if you've got a background, I mean, you wouldn't want to do that for your whole career because it's all textual, but, you know, nor do you want to always be having orchestral bells and whistles flying all over the place with massive themes. So it was a real privilege. I would say Captain Phillips and Mosul are both in that category of highly realistic, highly unmelodramatic, you know, the opposite of lyrically invasive. And it's to do with how to control texture. So it's still, if you pull the music out, you're definitely missing something. But when you put it in, it's got this layer of abstraction that allows the audience to have their own feelings about things and doesn't box them in so they have to feel a certain way.
Yeah, John Powell said the same thing about working with Paul on United 93, and
that's another great example.
Yeah, that's a great example, and he said it was very in Green Zone too. Talk about Matt Damon, but in Green Zone,
Well,
I'm
not knocking, by the way.
Not knocking. No,
because I said Matt Damon. It sounds like I'm knocking Green Zone.
Green Zone is actually a really great film.
Yeah,
and it's very intense and well made. So, with a great performance by Matt Damon.
Yes. Yeah,
but John explained how it was very difficult to kind of make a score work in that sense and not comment on that, but also fulfill what a score needs to do. It's a really interesting challenge, I think, for a composer.
It is. Yeah. It is. It would. It would. Paul in particular, I reached levels of sort of deconstruction I didn't even know were possible. Imagine I said to you, please paint a painting, but don't make it too narrative, make it abstract. And so you paint something, and let's say it's sort of set in a desert, but it doesn't have any human people. But you can sort of see what things that look like hills. And I bust you and go, no. I feel like I'm in a desert landscape. So then you do version 2, and now there's no desert landscape. It's just made out of lines, and then there are various shapes and whatnot. And I go, okay. And you're thinking, dude, it's so stripped down. I don't think he's going to go for it. And I go, and then I look at your painting and go, you know what? It's way too busy. And you're like, you are kidding me. And I go, okay, so lose the background and just keep something. And it eventually gets down to like one square in the bottom left-hand corner, half a triangle in the top right-hand corner, and like a squiggle in the middle. And you're thinking, really? Perfect. And then they go, yeah, we're nearly there. Get rid of the squiggle. Leave a huge hole in the middle and just put the two,
Well, it's funny because while Mosul was based on a true story, you also did Extraction, which was produced and written by your friends, the Russo brothers, but directed by longtime stunt performer and coordinator Sam Hargrave. And we've seen what that does. We've seen the success of hiring a stunt coordinator like that with the John Wick series, because it turned out to be fantastically, they know how to shoot action. So I'm curious, for Extraction, did you notice a different way of the way they were shooting and editing that Sam brought to the action that maybe you didn't see on other kind of action projects? Did it feel more?
Yeah, yes and no. The guy's a ninja. He's got a stuff. But funnily enough, I had seen it because he did some work on Winter Soldier.
Right, he was a coordinator, yeah.
Exactly. Now, if you look at some of that action on Winter Soldier, it's sort of like violent, acrobatic, but kind of balletic and beautiful all at the same time. It was sort of genre changing, meaning once that happened, if you didn't really have fresh action shots, you were looking stale.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There was something about the way that was put together that moved everything on. And that's just, he has, it's the weirdest thing, because, it's not like I approve of violence, but the way because it's not real, there is an artistic side to it. It's like a very weird combination of toughness, but there is something balletic in his.
It's any kind of fight choreography. Especially when you look at martial arts, and especially in the kind of Asian countries of kung fu and karate, and look at Jackie Chan films and how those are. I always go back to old Jackie Chan films because it's a ballet, it's a dance, and they take it so seriously in terms of the execution. And I know Jackie Chan has a little more levity to his films, a little bit more comical.
Right,
but,
of course.
Yeah, so he definitely wants to make it feel light. Yeah, but this one is a bit darker. Yeah, so.
And if you want someone highly emotionally troubled, emotionally stunted, and can't really talk about all his problems whilst being incredibly tough and sort of semi-nihilistic about not caring whether he lives or dies, hello, Mr. Hemsworth, step up. He completely delivers the pain. On the one hand, he delivers all the physical requirements of the extremely demanding physical role, but managed to convey, when not a lot of it's revealed all the time in the story, the troubled, that scene where he sinks down to the bottom when he's hanging out with his mates and then just jumps in the water. Although it's sort of like a breathing chick and everything, you do get the hint of a man who, should he stay down there and not bother coming back up and drown,
Right. Yeah,
whatever.
absolutely.
It's a different sort of nihilism to the nihilism of the Joker in Nolan's Batman, who's obviously
Yes.
manic and crazy. But before, as an audience, you know the background story about his son. He carries with him a sort of reckless abandon. It's a really weird combination of being incredibly disciplined as a fighter, but having an underlying psychic and spiritual recklessness to do with basically not caring about himself or whether he lives or dies, and feeling like he doesn't really deserve life itself.
Right.
It's an odd combination, and he managed to sort of convey that without using many words.
Yeah, absolutely, which is the best way to do it.
Exactly. So the music was, a combination of these odd recall moments of emotional tenderness or emotional pain, and then large stretches of taut, gnarly, unthematic, visceral, textural action music, and with the slight towards the end, that slight combination of it being both an action sequence but also a falling hero who doesn't really care about his own life kind of collide by
absolutely.
the end. But it's another movie where, if you unlike Jumanji, as you start getting flowery with thematic material, the first thing you'll do is absolutely ruin Chris Hemsworth's performance.
Well, speaking of Jumanji, you got to come back to the sequel, which was another amazing delay. I think the first one surprised everybody with how amazingly heartfelt it was, and the characters and everything. And you got to come back to that world. And I know we've covered kind of how you approach sequels, but I'm sure it must have been fun to just go in there and just have a blast with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's at the other end of the spectrum.
Yes.
The great advantage, but you know what's similar is the advantage of a director who's a writer, like Matthew on Mosul, and Jake Kasdan, who comes from, sort of Hollywood lineage. I mean, his father...
Lawrence Kasdan.
Didn't he write Empire Strikes Back? I think he wrote it.
Yeah.
It's not to say you don't get... We just mentioned a director who completely nailed a movie coming from stunt and choreography, as it were. So there's a million one ways to come at being a director. But the advantage of a writer is any time in the filmmaking there's a crossroads or a discussion or a debate or the potential for confusion or, the fumbling around to find the right direction.
Absolutely.
He has a writer's perspective. So it's like, okay, let's go back to first principles. The idea, when I wrote this, the whole idea of this, the whole function of this scene was blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, so going all the way back to first principles, if that's the idea of the scene, then perhaps the musical approach should be X, because that will support most, what this original idea. Now, it's not always an advantage, because sometimes, not in the case of Jake, but sometimes a writer could have this idea in his head, but it never got nailed in execution. So they're going on about something that's in the script and in their head, but absolutely not in the editing room, not even on the cutting room floor. And you have to gently explain to them, well, that's a fantastic idea, but it's absolutely not represented in the film. And I can't write a piece of music supporting a scene that you failed to shoot or execute. That obviously wasn't a problem with Jake, but yeah, he had the fact that he's a writer and he's great with all the actors and he's great with music. He and also celebrates the very thing I was saying won't work in Mosul and Paul Greengrass, Captain Phillips. Jumanji will not work the other way around. If you don't have an opinion and you're not narratively and thematically grand, you failed. You need an adventure theme. You need a Jumanji theme. You need like the sort of the desert remix of it for the second one. The Attack of the Mandrills is a cue I spent about 3 weeks on. You need all of your thematic DNA to elevate what is a fantasy action adventure tale that couldn't be more different in filmmaking to the sorts of things we're talking about. So, the reverse rules apply. If you're trying to get through some Attack of the Mandrill cue by pulsing your way through with a bit of a drone and a bit, forget it. It's got to be full bells and whistles, virtuoso orchestration as far as you can go, and as much storytelling wedded to the scene. And themes that
Yeah.
support the aspirations of the characters and everything. It's the complete reverse of the super psychologically credible, realistic type filmmaking. So, I'm pretty lucky that you get to do, but you just got to remember which hat to have on.
Yeah, you don't want to accidentally wear the wrong hat. Yeah. Because then you will be fired.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Well, what sometimes happens is you have a hangover from a previous project.
Oh, yeah, creative
If you've been
hangover,
working
sure.
on a Jumanji or an animated film, the first couple of things you do, perhaps on something that's completely modern and abstracted or a bit too frilly, and conversely, if you've been working on something very deconstructed, your first couple of things on something for an animated film, need to go up a few gears in
Right.
speed of harmony and ideas and whatnot. There's usually a sort of week. It's a bit like jet lag. You get a jet lag hangover from the previous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever the set, because usually by the time you get to the end of a movie, you're so in the swing. You finally, between you and the filmmakers, you found the tram lines and the trains rolling, and there's a set of aesthetic codes that go with the movie, and you've got your themes, and you figured out the tricks for the orchestration and what the sounds are, what the whole shebang has found its feet. And no sooner have you done that, it's over. So as soon as you get to the next thing, you've got a bit of a jet lag hangover of whatever that set of things were,
Right.
and now no longer needed, need to go straight in the bin, and you got to start all over again with a whole new approach.
Absolutely. So I did want to bring up Alex Belcher because he's been your co-composer on scores like I.O.
Well, he was on Mosul. We should have mentioned on
Mosul.
Yeah, and Extraction.
And Extraction.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, not on Mosul, on Extraction.
No, on Extraction, 21 Bridges, I.O.
21 Bridges. I'm getting all my movies mixed up.
So when you have, Alex has been with you for some time. So when you have a young composer who works with you like Alex, and he's demonstrated he's ready to kind of take on the responsibilities and pressure that come with, working on a film like that. Do you see it more like working with a colleague with Alex, or do you see it as, you see yourself more as a mentor to him, you're trying to bring him up? Like when it comes to that dynamic, does it change when it comes to co-composing a score with somebody who's kind of worked under you for some years?
Well, there's a tiny bit of the mentor thing, but to be honest, it's more, that's really historical. If you, in the case of 21 Bridges and Extraction, if you shouldn't enter into a co-write situation unless you have creative confidence and respect for
each other.
Exactly. But so by the time it gets to that level, it's not, the fact that he's worked with me before not in that capacity is sort of ancient history, because otherwise there's no point in having, if any time there's like a creative conundrum to solve, if you don't have the feeling that you can discuss it with your co-composer on even terms, like, hey, what should we do here? And it feels like, oh, I've got to figure this out. And then once I've figured it out, this other person can help in the execution. Then it's not real. And that absolutely isn't the case. The reason I had the confidence to invite someone with his great talent and like, what would be the word? Authenticity.
Yeah, sure.
He's got a great streak of artistic authenticity, which sounds like an odd thing to say. It's like, well, surely anyone would, but that's not quite true. It's possible to be very adept and very musically talented, very flexible, but not necessarily have a sort of stubborn streak of artistic authenticity, such as you might find like in a singer-songwriter, you know what I mean? Because you have to be so much more flexible in film music. You're not going to get a really successful singer-songwriter is not usually going to be able to swing from, some highly techie thing to some, 16th century thing. That's just not how it works. They've got songs that they think are socially relevant or connect with people, and Alex has a little bit in a good way. You don't want too much of that, otherwise you would restrict what you can work on. Right. But because he's got a background in guitars and it's not like he only knows about symphonic music, and some of that. I wouldn't want to say Dylan, because it's not like he's a huge Dylan fan, but there's an aspect of the authentic American singer-songwriter artist almost. That's part of his DNA, except he's way more flexible because he's worked in film music. But it's actually a great quality, because and that's why it was really great to collaborate with him. So that when it comes to ideas and how to approach something, it's got a whiff of Radiohead about it. It's like, I'm being really inarticulate and fumbling for the words, but it would be very different to supposing you were collaborating with someone who'd been an orchestrator all their life.
Yes.
So it's, we could do this and we could put it on this. And so, well, no, it's not really about what we could put it on. It's more like an overall artistic conversation about what would the musical kernel and egg of something be, not going straight for the box of bells and whistles and all the, for want of a better word, skills and the crafting element.
Yes.
More what would happen if you said to, more like a singer-songwriter artist. Yeah, I'm fumbling for words, but anyway, I've always liked that about Alex, and as long as that's, which it is in his case, is combined with all the flexible things you need in film music. 1 minute you have to be orchestra, because he's great. He's actually a great guitarist.
Yes, yeah,
which I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah, he's fabulous.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a similar thing. His guitar playing is a bit like that. What's interesting about Alex is he's decidedly unimpressed by virtuoso fiddly, well, not fiddling, but the guitar playing whose main purpose is to demonstrate like speed of playing.
Right.
Well, if you listen to the guitar sounds he gets, it's that same, it's very, he works on his sounds, meaning, people who have not been in bands underestimate the importance of like the credibility of the basic sounds that are being made. So that something can be played on guitars that's super simple. The actual riff is really simple. The issue is, do you sound like an annoying student or like a film music wannabe? Or have you got like a seriously credible guitar sound? You go, damn, those guitars sound. Like imagine listening to a Black Keys album where the guitar sounds are all like crappy. There's no point listening.
Right.
Or Alabama, what do they call it? Alabama Shakes. I mean, there's the sonics of what they're doing are seriously grown up. They're thoughtful.
Yeah.
It's, if you're a guitarist, you live and die on the credibility of your sound, unless you're one of those virtuoso people that have got kind of no interest in listening to. So it's a similar thing. Maybe that actually it can account for, if you're a guitar, if you have a background in guitar, then even if you're just doing some basic chords, the whole discipline of finding your sound and getting a credible sound is not to do with anything virtuoso. I'm being hopelessly unarticulate, but you know what I'm saying? It's
I absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has there's something about that which has its own artistic discipline of getting your own sound, and it may be that the chords you're playing could be quite straightforward, or it could be that the things are doing quite simple. It's like literally a piece that sounds great and it's made out of 3 tracks, a guitar, then a sort of ambient thing over the top. But it's like how you got those sounds and what you're doing with it is the difference between, Radiohead versus just something that you thinking is generic and appalling,
Right, absolutely.
So I think that's had a really good influence on the way, it's like a lens that he sees the world through.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to also give a shout out to another great composer you work with is Anthony Willis, and he's I think a fantastic young talent.
Yeah.
And
he's great. No, totally different background. It's interesting having to. Yeah, it just shows that just all the great thing about film music is all different angles. It's the same as directors. Directors come from being picture editors. They come from being writers. They come from
stunt coordinators.
Oh God, yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing. The common thread is imagination. People sometimes ask me, what makes a film composer, and as if as long as you've got a box of bells and whistles, and it is good to be able to be flexible and everything. But as we were just pointing out with talking about Alex, ultimately, I think the people who stick out a bit, it's actually something a bit more underneath that underneath there's a kernel of imagination that ends up being particular to them. So you could imagine a situation where someone who has fewer flexibilities, but some underlying opinion that keeps seeping out and expressing itself, in the long run might be better off than someone who, a bit like a hairdresser, is just like, well, how do you want me to cut it? I don't really have an opinion of my own. But they've got a million and one ways they can do things. You know, I mean, you never know. There are no hard and fast rules, but having an underlying opinion, which obviously always has to be collaborative and in association with, it's no good just having an opinion and ignoring the director and the producer. But, you know, the number one thing is a sort of artistic impetus that has a sort of authenticity to it. And then you can work on, you know, if you want to be really flexible, you know, it'd be great to be able to do a bit of this and a bit of that and know something about orchestration and electronics and whatnot. But it's not necessary. I mean, we can both think of composers who are highly regarded and do brilliant things who are not super flexible. They've got a thing, you know, it's, you know, not that narrow, but there's a bunch of things that we know that they could do, but there's also a bunch of things you would never ask them with, you know. I can think of composers who've done absolutely brilliant scores. So you'd never ask them to do a Harry Potter score.
Right,
not
exactly.
You know what I mean? With sort of, and you could think of people who are orchestrally incredibly adept who would perhaps not be the right candidate for someone else. So it's not a criminal offense that you don't do everything.
It's just everyone, it's the beauty of individuality and
exactly.
and the beauty of passion and different interests,
Exactly, which if anything underlines my point of the most legitimate factor is that underlying artistic authenticity, and then you'll find a home for it, hopefully. I mean, there are so many things being made between the old studios themselves and, you know, the new world of Netflix and all the rest of it. The sheer amount of things being made that go from like 9th century China to 23rd century, you know, the future. You know, there's a voice for so many people's talents and opinions. So, you know, it's all good.
Absolutely. So recently, of course, let's talk about the Comey Rule. Now, I think I originally reached out, I think, before the election, and you were busy, which is, I think, better for us because now the election is over. We can put that behind us. Joe Biden is, you know, president-elect.
Pending some legal,
Trump being,
if we were to be
completely,
if we were to be constitutionally as neutral as humanly possible, we would say that the vast majority of people have accepted the result, but that technically and legally there are some outstanding issues which will play themselves out with the high likelihood of no change in the overall outcome, but we can't yet legally say that until they've worked their way through the system. I'll get brownie points for being...
So you've now entered into our messy politics with this film, but you got to be part of kind of the first real dramatization of the Trump White House. And so how did you get involved with this miniseries? Because I noticed, you know, the talented Billy Ray wrote and directed, and he was the writer for Captain Phillips. I don't know if there's a connection. I don't know if there's a connection there, but how did you get involved with this project?
Let's see. I think Billy just called me. I think I got lucky because I was all lined up to go, I just can't fit it in. And I really wanted to do it. Starting with first principles, I read the script and, you know, Billy, not a million miles from Matthew in, you know, incredibly articulate, incisive, creative. The genius of Billy is that the proposition is, let's make something that's 2 one-hour episodes that is basically men and women talking in rooms. That's the drama, all right?
Right.
Now, obviously, it's such a fantastically interesting thing, and the president is such an unusual and charismatic, disruptive figure that, you know, I make it sound like it. But the basic proposition is that something very engaging and dramatic is going to unfold that is basically shot in rooms with people talking. That's it.
Right.
And so when you look at it through that lens, it makes you realize that the writing, and also, hang on, let's also factor in that the discussions are not simplistic that sounds pejorative, but if you have a sort of movie, if a movie was something heroic or a superhero movie or something, you're not going to have incredibly technical bureaucratic discussions about the Attorney General and the constitutional niceties of what should or shouldn't be happening. It's very technical. He didn't pull his punches. All the scenes are legit, and all of the positions within the US government. I mean, if you're not an expert in politics, a brilliant job was done of being able to follow the serious professional dilemmas that Comey ended up being pushed into, without having to go, look, you could imagine a producer saying, listen, there's no way we can make something like this with everything being politically realistic. There's going to be endless detailed and technical conversations about the role of the Attorney General, the role of the Director of the FBI, and what is and what isn't supposed to happen. And, I just don't think we can make something with, this is going to be boring. No one's going to want to watch it. And none of the above is true. He managed to combine the total credibility of not Hollywoodizing, to use a slightly unfair and pejorative term, or let's use a different term. Instead of going, okay, let's strip out all the realisms to dumb it down so we can package it so that people who don't have an expertise in all the niceties of the American Constitution, that's not what he did. And yet, if you follow it, and I still maintain, because I musically tried to be as politically neutral as possible, I maintain that it stands on its feet artistically, meaning, to me, it's not a 2-hour polemic about what an awful person Trump is. It's a story about a man, Comey, who has, and by the way, he's set up at the front as being described not as a hero, but a showboater who's a bit vain, and he should have calmed down a bit and just kept his ego intact and just crack on with the technical functions of the job and not try to be such an all-American hero. That's the first thing you hear. So it's not like he's set up as a hero, and then you make your own mind up. But my point being, to me, and how I approached it musically, was it's a story about a man who has a love affair with the FBI. He has a love of the institution of the FBI, and he really believes in it. It's the love of an ideal. He believes in public service and in the independence of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, how that should not be polluted by anyone, regardless of it's Trump or that there are norms of how things should work. And he gives a great speech about why, when he gets interviewed by Obama, it's like, well, why should I, you supported McCain, I can't remember, you supported some Republican, why would I hire you?
Right.
And in his interview, he gives this story that I won't bore everyone with, but it's to do with, making money in the private sector is great, but devoting my life to catching the bad guys. Some terrible incident happened in his childhood, and he was threatened, and his house was broken into, and they nearly died, and they never caught this guy. And he's like, I hate that, and I would love to be part of an initiative that catches the bad guys. It's like the bureaucratic, technocratic version of a superhero. Only, unlike Marvel movies, you can't do unrealistic things. You've got to just try and solve crime and try and make America a slightly safer place than it is, right? So that's the ideal. And then he happened to be around at an extraordinary time in American politics, where he was, I think Billy did a brilliant job of demonstrating situations almost unimaginable in our careers, where it does not matter what you do, you are screwed. Here are your 4 options. If you do this, it's going to be really bad for this reason. Your other options to do this, that's going to be a disaster because of this. This is to do with, the Hillary email thing. Here are your 4 options, and none of them are good. You are screwed whatever you do. Now, as a film composer, there's usually an option where you can emerge triumphant. It's tricky, like the producer disagrees with the director, blah, 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 blah. You can get tricky situations, but ultimately you can pop out the other end with some piece of music that everyone seems to like, or the person who didn't like it and wanted to go in a different direction got told to shut up by someone, or whatever. You don't end up being forced into a position where the decision you make could have a massive political, electoral, and constitutional consequence for the world's largest democracy and most powerful country. I mean, it's a really serious job where, and he happened to have it at a time where the person who got elected to the White House for the first time was not a career professional politician, but a complete outsider whose approach to it was just anyone who thinks like, oh, you know, all the sort of lazy liberal thinking of like, Trump's just an idiot, should go in a room with him with a plan that they had in their head and see what happens. Because you walk out going, what the hell just happened?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Comey would go into these meetings with the, I don't know what you'd call it, the sort of professional expectations and norms of a discussion with that would ordinarily take place as the director of the FBI and the president, and was quickly finding that he was just all over the place. The ground was just falling from under his feet as Trump was in like rapid fire asking questions and maneuvering into situations that really troubling from a constitutional point of view. And so it's just not true. He's an extremely tricky customer. You know, if you think you could walk into a room with Trump and you're going to walk out getting everything you want, you're probably going to walk out and go, I've almost no idea what just happened, but I'm quite unsettled. You know, I don't know if you've read the John Bolton book.
I have not, no.
I read that, but it's interesting because he ended up leaving, and I mean, John Bolton could hardly be described as a liberal. I mean, he's a
not at all, yeah.
A highly intelligent and erudite man, but a hawkish right winger by anyone's standards, including his own. Ended up splitting the White House, and his biggest complaint, from John Bolton's point of view, being a right winger and a hawkish person, he actually didn't mind some of Trump's instincts to do with, you know, being a bit stricter with China and you know, his main thing's a foreign policy thing. His complaint was, it's just all over the place. You know, you try and form some sort of policy, and I'm not a politician, but you know, there's a way of going about things. By 2 o'clock, it's falling apart, and you're hearing from someone else, and nothing's done in the way it's ordinarily done. So no one knows where they stand. The next thing you know, like the Taliban are being summoned onto a plane, and he wants to hang out with them at his place. And first, it's every norm and every way of doing things. It could last about 5 minutes before suddenly everything is upended. You know, it's like walking around, not on eggshells, but you started off on the floor and then you ended up on the ceiling. And so without getting into whose side anyone is on, what I was trying to do, my approach to do with music was the opposing forces of a man who wanted to stand firm and fulfill his ideal dream of a job, which is that he loves the institution of the FBI, and in the most idealistic sense, what that represents about what good a man can do or a woman can do as a public servant for the protection of the American people. And then on the other hand, a highly disruptive outside force that seeks to get out of the head of the FBI a personal loyalty that's much more important to Trump, who sees the world much more just in direct personal terms, more like a godfather-y man. You know, his view is much less technocratic and political, and much more like, I want to have a meeting with you where I look you in the eye and you tell me you're going to do what I want, which is not exactly how it's supposed to work, you know?
Right.
And so I just tried to, so I came up with I've been waffling about all this politics, but.
No, it's great.
So instead of going, right, let's have baddie music for Trump and let's have heroic Captain America style music. The first counterintuitive thing that I thought of doing, because I remember talking with Billy and Jeff about it, the biggest mistake would be like, well, you know, let's get a sort of, an errand Copeland-esque 20th century influenced brass chorale, you know, let's go for like, let's extract out of that 20th century concert music the lofty ideals. Now, you know, it's not a terrible idea, but all that would happen is it would be instantly tilted. So like the minute Comey's on screen, before we've even got through this 2-hour episode, he's feeling like Captain America before he's even opened his mouth, you know?
Yeah.
And that's no good because it isn't as simple as that. And there are people who would argue that, you know, whilst he was a noble-minded person, if he just sort of had a slightly less high opinion of his own political merit and treated the job a bit more bureaucratically, he may not have got his knickers in such a twist, right? So
Right.
you can't have something as redolent as something that would work for Captain America. So I decided, instead of rooting around in sort of Copelandy fanfare for the common man, diatonic Americana, I had this really counterintuitive thought, because like I said, I went to St. Paul's Cathedral. I love all that music of Tallis and Orlando Gibbons and Palestrina, all this European 16th century church music. The one thing that, now of course, I'm not proposing to get a whole load of music sounding like an English cathedral choir with an organ, blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about the harmony. The harmony of that music is somewhat modal, and it feels different. It feels from a slightly different era. It's not the same as diatonic harmony, without boring all your listeners. But the point is, the origin of that music is devotional. The idea of that sort of church music was that it is in service of a greater thing. In the case of 16th century music and in Protestant and Catholic music, in the service of God, it would have been for Palestrina and Tallis and Gibbons. So there's a slight loftiness to it, but it's a long way from filmic, heroic music that's born out of that sort of Korngoldy, Copelandy, you know.
Absolutely.
It's a totally different strain that comes from unegotistical music, where composers are expected to write Kyrie eleisons and Glorias and Sanctus and Agnus Dei, the idea being that there's a choir, and the whole thing is in service of God, right? So the idea of God. So I thought, if I sort of rummage around in that area, get a modal theme going, which is what I did for Comey, but let's use piano and strings and get a long way from organ and cathedral. I think it's going to have this feeling of something, because don't forget, that's also where Arvo Part, you know, the whole Arvo Part thing is a sort of it's a 20th century renaissance of picking up some of the ideas of this early music, and then obviously it's for orchestra, but so there is a 20th century precedent for it, because the you know, European composers like Arvo Part definitely were making a 20th century revoicing of this devotional music that I'm talking about. So I had that in mind, and you might think, well, why the hell, you know, it's an American, so why the hell are you doing that? But I think music doesn't really have geographic boundaries. I think what happens is, if you listen to those Comey cues, it doesn't feel too personal, it doesn't feel too heroic, and you get that sense of a man who's devoted to duty, but nor does it sound too churchy, because I got rid of the choir and the organ and got it on strings and piano. But there's this legacy of a noble ideal, but without the personal heroism that I didn't want to attach to Comey, because then it's just a oversimplified story if you do that. Like, Comey is this wonderful man and Trump's a bad man, and that's all it's about. It's not about that.
No, yeah.
It's about a guy trying to do his job, and about the integrity of democratic institutions versus a disruptive force that is coming at those institutions in a way that is not ordinarily associated with the president, causing a lot of confusion and difficult situations. So it's the same with Trump. I had a bit of a rummage around for a while, and any time, because you know how we've always said this, I love dissonant harmony, and I love Sidorovsky and da-da-da. And so as soon as you've got a Predator movie, or you know, anything where there's like badness at hand, I just go launching into to wander down the dissonant and you know, atonal stuff as far as I can go before the director stops me. You can't do any of that with Trump, because it's just so cheesy. What are you saying? Like, the first time you get a Trump cue, you're just like going to lay on all the dissonance and go, he's an evil man. I tried to do something very different, which was have something quite simple. I actually stayed in very diatonic harmony, so that there's nothing overtly bad about it, and tried to make the Trump musical ideas more a seed of, because I mean, to this extent, I wasn't neutral. The Trump music was how Trump affects Comey, right? So if you're a Trump supporter, you would have hoped for some sort of wonderful, uplifting, make America great music. But because of the nature of this story, the Trump effect within the story was as far as Comey was concerned, and as far as people trying to do their job in the way they had ordinarily done it, it was a sort of pervasive and slightly corrosive, or slightly, ultimately very corrosive effect. So I needed to come up with a musical idea that didn't feel evil, but that felt like an influence on Comey and his colleagues that was a bit slippery and a bit difficult to deal with, but not too overt, not bombastic. The character himself is bombastic enough.
Right, right.
The important thing to get across musically was more that because of the interactions with Trump, some underlying pervasive quality started to infiltrate how things ordinarily work. So if you were a computer programmer, it would be like, oh, well, we usually do the OS like this and it's all working. And then some other coder comes in like, wait a minute, what's going on? This guy's like started coding, but it's kind of messing up. Like, I don't know what he's done because it's like messing up my code, and now the graphics kind of I don't really know what he's done, but like I'm really confused, and I don't even know what language this coding's. You know, it's that sort of effect. So I tried to be, and same with Billy and Jeff. I think the idea was, I mean, I'm sure if you were a very strong Trump supporter, you'd probably watch it and go, well, that felt very much like, you know, Trump wasn't the hero. Okay, well, fair enough. But I don't think you could say that the whole thing was a political polemic that just did its best to, you know, humiliate Trump. I think the performance from Brendan Gleeson was fantastic, and I think I think even Trump supporters, very committed Trump supporters, would have to concede that whatever he is, he's a highly unconventional and disruptive. I mean, that's what they'd be proud of. You know, he's not
right.
He's not a career. If you're expecting things to go smoothly and by convention, that's the exact opposite, you know, of what he is. So I think it's something that a show that could be enjoyed by people who are relieved that he's no longer the president. It certainly could be enjoyed by anyone who's sort of politically neutral and just wants to watch a show that's actually a fascinating insight into what the hell happened to Comey in those incredibly stressful times. And, you know, maybe you're a bit annoyed if you're a full-blown Trump supporter, but I would hope they would watch it and go, look, you know, it's a decent presentation of what it felt like from Comey's point of view. So, and musically, I get it. I know I keep talking about all these narrative things, but musically, having got this devotional theme, like I say, that was influenced by some modal music and slightly Arvo Partis tinge to it, and this other slightly snaky, pervasive kind of egg that I came up with for Trump, not dissimilar. It's like the opposite of Jumanji. Whilst it was more thematic, it was another case of being understated, because almost all of the scenes, apart from the odd exterior shot of Trump Tower or you know, a shot of the White House or something, most scenes are people talking in an elevator on their way to having a meeting with Trump, a meeting in Trump Tower, a meeting back at the FBI. You know, they're all meetings, so you can't be overblown.
Yeah,
I had to wait to the end of the second episode after he'd been fired, when he's giving a quite emotional speech about Comey, this is, but despite the fact he's been fired, he still wants to give a speech about what it means to work at the FBI and how grateful he is for the public service. That's the closest you get. It's like, come on, let me off the hook a bit here. You know, this is his money moment. You know, it's not quite Jerry Maguire, but you know,
right.
But so I tried to retain a sort of ruthless tastefulness about how never to make Trump overblown. There should never be a musical cue that feels a bit like a Zemo cue from, you know, like Captain America.
Right.
Nor should there ever be a Comey cue where you feel like he's about to go and suit up and go get a shield. You know, it's
right.
all, the aesthetic borders, you know, have to come in a bit so that you respect the, you know, the authenticity of the writing and how realistic it was. So yeah, I found it highly enjoyable, and I thought Billy and Jeff, I thought it was just a very smart. To me, almost the biggest achievement is, I mean, I don't know how people. I didn't actually spend that long looking at the reviews of it, but I would say that, I don't know if you agree with me, but someone who's not a political nerd would probably watch that and go, that was really engaging, and I think that's really difficult to do
Very. I think it's very tricky to do. I think political films in general, even if it's more traditional, maybe something like JFK or something. But it's just like it's.
Right, but you've got a nuclear crowd. The thing about JFK, where Billy's such a genius. The thing about JFK. Oh well, hang on. No, I'm thinking of 21, which is the one with the Cuban Missile Crisis. No, I've misrepresented. I was thinking of the movie about the Cuban Missile Crisis. What was that called? That was Kevin Costner.
Oh,
because it of course involved JFK, who was the president at the time. Anyway, the point being, those are bigger canvases. It's still tricky to make.
Sure. This is a very you're speaking. They're all in rooms. They're all talking, and it's completely different. And I think as a composer too, it's tricky because you're navigating these performances, and these performances are really good, especially Brendan Gleeson. I mean, that's a tricky to not do Trump and be a caricature. As versus like where Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live.
Right. It's not an impersonation, but you need enough of the physical characteristics and the little mannerisms and tics and whatnot to just put yourself there as an actor so that people accept it as Trump.
Yeah.
But then it's not an impersonation; it's a dramatic performer. I mean, the guy's a genius.
Oh, he's so good.
I mean, he played Churchill in obviously the Gary Oldman Churchill in that more recent one, so celebrated. But people shouldn't forget Brendan Gleeson played Churchill on one of the HBO, and he just merges into the character.
So good, yeah. He's one of my favorite actors. Yeah,
you're right. When you have performances like that, you've got to be careful in terms of not being intrusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But Billy, between with the spotting and just collaborating with Billy and Jeff, the picture editor, we just found our way through. Because if anything, I think at first we were so sparse that there wasn't actually enough music. We'd spotted it so respectfully, and then we just found we could open it up a little bit. But it was really tricky to find like where the needle
kind of jumps to
exactly.
Okay, it's too much now.
Yeah, exactly. It was a bit of trial and error, and you have to sort of watch it down from the top. It's amazing how little straw breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the film I think turned out fantastic, or the miniseries turned out fantastically, and of course everything that we've talked about since last time we talked, I've always enjoyed. And so, Henry, thank you again for another amazing chat.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, my friend. So, thanks again for.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're healthy. Stay healthy, because I think the numbers are going up. So
they are. We're staying put. I'm working from home probably till the next summer, so we'll see.
Well, let's see what happens with some of these vaccines. While we're all doing our thing, there are some really smart people who've probably been cranking from 7 a.m. to 11 since March. And, they're not sitting on their hands, and there's some really smart people. So
they're all going to save our asses for sure.
Yeah. At some point, I have great confidence in medical genius. So we'll see. Hopefully it won't be that long.
Absolutely. Well, Henry, I hope you have a great rest of the year, safe rest of the year, holidays and everything. So if I don't talk to you till then, so it's good to chat.
And thank you very much.